Won't you listen to reason? Will you open your eyes? It's a wonder what you'll find with an open mind. You may be surprised. Yeah, gotta get away from this illusion for the sake of the world. This delusion, it's gotta go.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Atheist Experience Live. It's Sunday, March 2nd. Yeah, March 2nd, 2014. I'm Matt Dillahunty. Tracie Harris is here with me this week.
Howdy.
We weren't sure who was going to be on this week. Originally,
It was a wild ride.
Dave Silverman from American Atheist was supposed to be flying through, but had to change his plans due to weather, so he didn't get to come on here. He's going to remind everybody about the American Atheist Convention that's coming up Easter weekend in April in Salt Lake City, Utah. So you can go to atheist.org for more information about that. I have been crazy busy, just lots and lots of debates. I went 2 weeks ago to San Antonio to a Church of Christ for their annual lectureship. And they actually have all the lecture notes from everybody who was there pre-printed up in a hardbound book that looks just like the songbook, except it's black. But the discussion for this was supposed to be the evolution of enlightenment. Can science and religion coexist? I'm going to talk about this, not today, but I'm going to start talking about it. My friends Aaron Ra and Seth Andrews, the three of us, are putting together this Unholy Trinity tour. We're starting in Amarillo, Texas on the 22nd, and then San Antonio and a third city that I've forgotten. But I'm going to use this as a talking point because it was one of the most depressing weekends for me in many ways, primarily because there was a lot of just flat science denial. And I don't have a problem with ignorance because ignorance can be solved by education. But there was willful ignorance and kind of a celebration of willful ignorance and encouraging it. I was just surprised. We're talking young earth, anti-evolution, mocking, scientists. Now, I will say, everybody there was really nice. I was treated well. They took us out to dinner. There was some good discussions, and there have been some good discussions afterwards. There are members of the church that have contacted me, to talk further and seek out more information, and that's great. It was the weirdest weekend I think ever, and Tracie was formerly Church of Christ, so I mean, you come from this weird background.
Yes.
I think probably what we'll end up doing is having a conversation about Church of Christ, talking more about your experience there and mine too at some point.
Yeah.
So we're going to skip that for today, other than to say, wow, I was shocked, and but I think some good came out of it. I'm not convinced a ton of good came out of it, but some good.
Yeah, they're quite the conservative group of people.
It's so funny because one of the things, the main preacher there had asked me if the two of us could have a discussion on Seth Andrews' show, The Thinking Atheist, because Seth keeps having false religions on, and
okay.
Gabriel's is the one true religion.
Sure.
And I'm like, yeah, we can do that. I'd love to know how you figured out that yours is the one true one and how everybody else can too. But anyway, you and Beth and Russell went out for an unusual day of your own yesterday.
Yeah, us and some of the ACA folks, we went to a Islam 101 seminar that was sponsored by the local Islamic Community Center and Mosque. And so they hosted like an informational sort of PowerPoint seminar. Their imam was there to speak and do the presentation and also to answer questions that the audience had based on the presentation. And we also got to sit through the call to prayer and to observe the call, not observe in the sense of join in, but to watch them do their prayers. And so that was kind of an interesting thing to witness. And then they did serve like a really great lunch, and they were extremely hospitable, very generous and open. And I think that they made what I would call a good faith effort to answer questions as directly as they could. And some questions I think were things that they struggled with that they still did their best to give an honest answer and to say, this is what I think, or this is what I think that the Quran would want me to do, or or God would want me to do based on the way I understand the Quran. And
now, some of you are going to get together and kind of do a...
Yeah. I've asked Russell and Beth if they'd be interested in putting together a blog post. I know Russell's already working on his, but what I'd like to do is just have the three of us independently sort of put together a little article that is, this is what I took away from it. Like, this was my take on the seminar, and this is, like, for example, I know Russell asked questions, Beth asked questions, I asked questions, and so I would like to take a moment to sort of talk about the questions that I asked and why I felt they were important to me, and then Russell could probably address, the things that he brought up and why that was important to him, and same with Beth. And so I feel like rather than post one blog post, or rather than one of us posting a blog post on a summary of the event, I thought it would just sort of be more interesting if we each gave this is what I took away from it, or this is what the things that I thought were impactful, or the things that I thought were most relevant, and this is why. Because I know that we all have like our different focus, of what's most important to us individually, and so I think that would be more useful to kind of do a broad spectrum of, here's what I saw, and here's what struck me. And I have a feeling that while there'll be some overlap, I think there will also be some disparity in sort of what probably stood out most to each of us. So,
yeah, I think that'd be great.
Yeah.
Beth and I, because I was helping a friend last night, we didn't actually get a chance to talk about it much. And she only mentioned actually a couple things to me, and it turned into a little joke, but I'm not going to steal her thunder. I'll let her post about it on the blog.
Yeah, I think that's great. And so, definitely we will put the word out once the post is up. We'll announce it so that people can go and see the summaries of that. So I don't want to give too much away. I mean, I had some, questions on secular government, views on secular government, but I didn't. It was interesting because the way the presentation was done, of course, was an informational seminar.
Sure.
So they're telling you about Islam, and then they're kind of saying, do you have a question on what we just talked about? And so there were things like the secular government view that weren't really part of the informational thing. And so
you stepped outside of their script.
Yeah, and so, well, I didn't really step outside. I kind of was holding it to see if there would be general questions accepted at the end, and then at the end we ran out of time. So I never got to ask about that, except that there was another question that I did ask that prompted one of the members to come and talk to me. And so that person came over and spoke to me, and I just felt like, well, this is a member at this mosque, and so he probably has attitudes that may or may not be representative, but let me just ask him. So I asked him about the secular government issue. And he was extremely supportive, about the idea of secular government. And I think we probably would get I think it's a different experience probably for members of the Muslim community living in the U.S. And that, he understood secular government. I would have liked to have gotten into, I guess, the question of how secular government manifests, so that I think of a secular government, as a very clear thing. If you have a religious supported or a religious perspective on like social issues, that really should be kept to the religion. So if you have something that is a religious structured lifestyle that is adherence to this religion must adhere to this to these things, then it seems to me that if a person is not an adherent, they're making a choice not to adhere to that lifestyle.
Yeah.
And so there's always this weird runoff that happens when obviously you're within that religious community and you're going to buttress and support those lifestyle decisions that your religion promotes and prescribes. And you do that by trying to claim that this is healthier, this is better, this is, makes for a better society. And it doesn't even matter if it really doesn't, right? I mean, you're within the community, and this is not strictly speaking, I want to make sure that people are clear, I'm not talking just here about Islam. This is a broad statement that when you have this, there's always this attitude that this is a better thing. And sometimes the religions that promote that these are better things have a lot of confirmation bias. and they look only at things that they think are evidentiary support for what it is they want to promote, and they then start to blur the line and get confused about where their choice of lifestyles as an adherent ends and where promoting social welfare begins. And they start basically trying to promote their lifestyle choices as adherents onto the greater society, thinking they're doing society this big favor, when in reality what they're doing is being religiously oppressive and trampling the religious freedom of people outside their religious denomination.
We saw that, as I mentioned earlier, with the Draw Muhammad thing. Nobody would have wanted to or cared to draw Muhammad until somebody tried to impose their personal religious convictions on a broader audience. Right. And it's the same type of thing, you know, without getting off on a tangent. For example, there's certain types of language that you're going to use in different venues to be considered acceptable, and there's regulations and rules and stuff, and you know, I understand all that. But for example, on this show, I can say God and I can say damn, but if I put the two together, that could potentially be a problem, you know, breaking a rule or something. And I have a strong objection to that, because now they're saying you can't offend somebody's religious sensibilities, because it's only putting those two words together. The only complaint that at that point, if you can say damn, is now you're offending my religious sensibilities. And I don't care. I don't give a rat's ass about offending your religious sensibilities.
Yeah, but for example, one of the things specifically, you know, obviously we had been there for a very long time, just so people know, the seminar went from like 10:30 in the morning till after 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And at that point, they had to shut it down. That was the end of it. And so it was a long, long day. You know, nobody was wanting, I guess, to hang around and keep chatting for another couple hours. At that point, we were pretty much done. But I would, for example, be interested in knowing, it's like, okay, so you agree that secular government, religiously neutral government is a good idea. You agree that that should be supported and that should be the role of a government. And that it shouldn't be used to promote or to, you know, and I think that I would think anyway, that as a religious minority community in Texas, that this would be very clear to people. And it did seem clear to the gentleman that I spoke to. But then I guess my question would be, okay, well, what do you think about gay marriage? You know what I mean? Are you going to say, if my religion is not in support of homosexuality, I understand that the government must be neutral, and so as far as gay marriage, sure. That's, you know, you can't do it if you're in my mosque, but you could do it if you're outside of my mosque and not a Muslim. And so my question is kind of more about not just, do you support secular government, and do you understand the benefit and of gaining religious freedom for everyone by having a religiously neutral government, but the question would be, what does that mean to you? Does that mean the same thing to you that it means to me? Or do you understand when you are crossing that line?
And I'm glad you brought that up before we take callers. Otherwise, we would have had basically me doing a teaser for all the talks I'm going to do and you doing a teaser for the blog. So I'm glad we got some substance in there. I had kind of a similar series of questions for the people at Church of Christ that I was interacting with. And by the way, 10:30 to 4:30 would have been a pleasure. This was 9:30 to 9:30, pretty much most of the weekend. But yeah, we kept wanting, both of us wanted to focus on the areas that we agree in order to find out where we disagree and have some discussion beyond that. Unfortunately, you know, there's a great many of things that we are going to agree on, and that's great. But what he seemed to want me to do, and you know, in an email discussion, was, you know, you guys should stop being so critical about religion and instead highlight the good things religions do. Well, that's easy. I'm not aware that religion in and of itself actually does anything that I would call good. I know religious people do good things, and those same things can be done by non-religious people. I don't know that any true good thing is done by religions and tied to the truth of the proposition of the religion.
It's interesting that you bring that up. Obviously, I've been doing, you know, a lot of stuff on religion and spirituality and healthcare. And I saw something recently that reminds me of that. It was like a scrub of some of the research that is like claims to be supportive of religion promoting better health, which I'm reading a book right now that is really interesting. Like I say, it's a scrub of that research that's basically saying it's not there. There is no findings that are indicating this. And one of the problems that they called out with the research studies had to do with a study that would look at, for example, Mormons versus non-Mormon populations. And what they were saying was that when you take a randomized population and compare it to a Mormon population, you should expect to get higher rates of disease that are related to smoking and drinking outside of the Mormon community. And no surprise there, you do. But the point is, that's not Mormonism making people healthier. That benefit would be there for anybody that drinks less, smokes less, doesn't smoke, doesn't drink. So if you're looking at did religion make them healthier or help them to avoid these particular health issues? No, not drinking and not smoking did. It's not the religion that did it. It's not drinking and not smoking. And even a non-religious person that would subscribe to that would have those same benefits.
And I've seen other kind of surface studies about suicide and depression and general happiness. And those are all really problematic because there are some religious groups where you are instructed essentially to portray happiness, even if that's not what you feel. Mormons leap to mind there. There are religions that have prohibitions against suicide, which isn't necessarily tied to the truth of the religion. It's just you've managed to convince people that there's a fate worse than death. And that is, if you kill yourself, you've given up your paradise, etc. But also, the idea of depression is one. There's a lot of problems with potential studies. It may be the case that people who are religious are less depressed, but why? Is it because their religion is true? I mean, if we find this across a number of religions, maybe it's because people who think that they're going to live forever don't really worry that much about the likelihood that it's going to end. I have heard from many atheists who have gotten mired in nihilism, that because ultimately, you're going to cease to exist, what value is your life? And it has value while you're living.
The problem, though, that one of the issues that he calls out in the book that I'm reading had to do with the idea that you can't do a control study on religion. So you can't just make people Baptists. You can't take a random population, make some of them Baptists and some of them not. So a big problem with this is that these are self-directed choices. So a person is in this religion, and it's because they've self-directed that. It's not that a researcher put them in that category. So you're looking at people that are now adhering to something as a group that they all want to adhere to, or that they're all agreeing to adhere to. And so the problem becomes, what other things go with that may or may not be related to the person who is attracted to this group? Yeah. So could it be that people that are more depressed just simply aren't as likely to go to church because they want to stay home, right? I mean, are they just less social in general? Because depression causes a lot of social withdrawal. So maybe they're not. Well, and
also the non-believing community has been kind of systematically socially ostracized. There's plenty of people who just wouldn't say, I'm an atheist, I'm a secular humanist, I'm a non-believer, because of the harassment that comes with it. I just saw another high school student who was trying to start an atheist group at her school, had this big fight back and forth, finally got approval, and then she had to give up because of the threats and the harassment that was coming in. How much of this, the problems outside of religion are caused by being in a kind of harassed minority in a largely religious environment?
But I guess what I'm saying is, what if people that are depressed are less likely to attend a social function? And so then what happens is that the religion doesn't make you happier, it simply doesn't attract people who are less happy, so that the people that are going to these social functions are already more outgoing and more assertive and more positive anyway.
They're the ones who want to go
and
there.
And they end up saying, I'm going to go to the social thing, right? I'm not just going to sit home in my dark room and be depressed. And so maybe it's just simply the case that you have a correlation there between people who are more outgoing and more positive that go to social functions, and religion is a very, very common social function, and so you simply don't attract the people that are depressed and don't want to go out. And they did a similar thing with religious attendance. They had these groups of people who had heart conditions, heart disease, And they studied them, and they found that after I think it was like a year or 5 years or something, I don't know how long they followed it, but people who attended church more, at the end of it had less mortality. And so they were like, wow, look at that, right? You go to church and you have, right. So you go to church and you're not dying, so this is like, church is really good for your health. And it's like, no, what they failed to investigate, and which was like a no-brainer and should have been considered, is that if you're too sick to go to church, you're more likely to die,
Yeah.
right? So these people weren't attending church because they were too sick to attend church, and they were looking at that like, well, you're not attending church and you did more poorly. And it's like, no, they didn't attend church because they were already doing poorly.
Yeah.
And then they died from this. And you're looking at that like
If only
evidence
we could have got them to church.
Yeah, they would have been healthy. And no, it is a complete distortion of the data and like such a biased interpretation of the data. But this is what happens when you look at it like, I need to prove that church attendance is better for you, instead of saying, what is actually going on? What is the mechanism here? And that is the one thing, the confirmation bias, I think, is the most painful thing, because they look at this as like a contest to prove what they already believe, instead of saying, what is in this data and what can we derive from this that's like a reasonable conclusion to draw from this data. And I just, it's extremely, you see it not just in apologetics, but now we're seeing it in research.
Yeah.
And it's very disturbing to me to see these research studies where people are going in, like the John Templeton Foundation, just saying, recognize that name as like a red flag if you see that tied to research, because they are promoting that religion is positive, has a positive effect on health and healthcare. They already have this bias toward wanting to prove that, and so they basically buy research that tries to prove this.
Although they have also published their failures. The failed prayer study. They were desperate to, let's test intercessory prayer, and of course it works at the rate of chance, which is to say it doesn't work.
Yeah. Well, that's good that once they fund it,
Yeah.
but let me tell you, they're funding it because they're hoping for a positive
Yes.
result. And if you give them positive results, you're more likely to get more funding, is my guess. They also fund religious curricula and programming at medical communities, just kind of an FYI. That was something I learned that I didn't know about, that you get grants from them if you will have religion at your medical school.
Yeah, because we don't already have enough religion in hospitals and everything else. Might as well.
But I'm starting to see more and more like what is driving the spirituality and the religion and healthcare push, and why that has really, really grown by leaps and bounds in like the last 2 decades. There is a big promotion for trying to make that a reality, to sort of find the data that will prove that religion makes you healthier, so that they can then, I'm sure, impose this even harder on society, because that's what they do.
So we'll get down to brass tacks here in a second. As a reminder, after the show's over, some of the people involved get together for dinner. Currently they're going to El Arroyo, which I don't have the address memorized, but it's 1624 West 5th Street, around 6 o'clock. Can't tell you what to do, but do what you want. Anyway, let's go ahead and get started with some calls. We've got Chris in Grand Rapids. How are you?
I'm doing good. How are you guys doing today?
Okay.
Oh, pretty good. A little sick.
Oh, well, I'm sorry to hear that. The reason I called in today is because I wanted to present to you guys a rational reason argument why creationism should be taught in a science classroom.
Oh, this would be good.
Yep. Now, the first part of my argument is that evolution is true. And by evolution, one aspect of evolution would be that complex life came from simpler life. I am more complex than my ancestors, and my ancestors were more complex than their ancestors.
Okay, so
Would you agree with that?
I have to stop you right there. Complexity is not the issue. Evolution.
No, so you do not believe that simple life comes before more complex life.
Yeah, we have very simple beginnings, and it's more complex, but it does. You can't portray it as a ladder evolving towards something that's more complex. That's just not the way it works.
I'm not saying there's an end goal to the complexity. I'm saying that.
Well, there's not always.
There's complex currently, then it started from something simpler.
Well, my point, which maybe you don't disagree with, is that the reason I objected to complexity is that the next random mutation that survives could be less complex under some some scale. It's not like a progression of complexity. But yes, from very.
But you did say we had simple beginnings. So can we settle on that we have simple beginnings?
As far as we know, yes.
Okay. The second basis for my argument is that evolution is fundamental to the understanding of the science of biology. And again, by biology, I mean the study of living organisms that lived in the past or that currently lives.
Okay.
Would you agree that evolution is fundamental to understanding biology?
Sure.
Okay. So if we think about those two premises and we take them to the logical conclusion, when we ask, well, as in a biology class, for example, well, where did life come from? We would then expect to see if it came through natural means, that all around us, life would just be popping into existence. Now, a lot of it may not be well suited for its environment, and it may just go extinct after a second.
No,
but
Chris.
every now and then, one would be suited for its environment.
Chris,
Yeah.
So there's about 12 problems here, and I want to try and hit them real quick. You gave two premises, and then you stopped constructing an argument and just said, if we take it to its logical conclusion, we get blah, blah, blah. That's not the way a logical argument works. But what you're trying to say, what you said, is that we would have to then talk about beginnings, which, while it is the foundation behind evolution, is not actually a part of it, this idea of abiogenesis, and it's an issue that we haven't solved. So we certainly should continue to explore the beginnings of life. But then you made this statement that made it sound like you expected life to constantly be beginning all around us all the time, which is absolutely nothing like what evolution would say.
Well, because evolution addresses life once it already exists. What I'm talking about is life actually starting. And since evolution is so fundamental to the understanding of biology, and and since it has simple beginnings, like we established, we would then expect origin of life to also be incredibly simple. That on a planet like we are now that can support life, we would expect it just to be popping in existence but not be suited for the environment.
No, it could take a very complex process that was only in effect, a billion years ago when the planet was very different than it is today. I think it's 3.5 billion or something is the estimate. I don't believe that we had the same environment on Earth that we have right now as far as atmosphere and what was happening.
Yeah.
And it could be that it took a very, very complex chain of chemical events to produce something very simple that was biologically driven.
Meanwhile,
I don't know.
Meanwhile, studies are showing that we could be seeing your scenario happening on multiple worlds, multiple planets in the universe, and that the building blocks of life may be abundant in the universe. But there's nothing that says within evolution or within the study of biogenesis and abiogenesis, there's nothing that says that the Earth maintains an environment that it consistently should be producing new life. That's simply false. The Miller-Urey experiments that were done that demonstrated, to some extent, the building blocks of life from non-life, one of the primary objections to their particular study is that they didn't accurately replicate the conditions of the Earth at that time. And so in this study of abiogenesis, which you can read more about, there are other people who've done other studies that better replicate the conditions on Earth at that time. And also there's this idea of directed panspermia, that maybe the actual life origin event happened somewhere else and spread out, an asteroid landed here and the conditions were just right. But your idea that because life started once, that it should therefore be a simple thing that should just be happening all the time on Earth as it is now, is not remotely tied to anything that science understands about life.
Well, there's a couple of things that I would take issue with what you said. First off, you said that, life billions of years ago could be drastically different than it is today.
No,
we don't know what it's going to be. It could be an incredibly complex process.
It could be
complex process that brought it to be.
It could have been a complex chemistry. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. If you take that, we don't know what life was like back then.
That's not what I said.
No.
It could have.
That's not what
Chris,
I said.
We're talking about what the conditions of the Earth were back then, not what life was.
I'm talking
back
about
then.
the chemistry.
Okay. Let me rephrase. Since we don't understand what the conditions of the Earth would have been hundreds of billions.
We have a
billions of
pretty
years
good
ago.
idea.
That's not what I said
That's not
either.
yeah, go ahead, Tracie.
That is not what I said. What I said was that whatever the chemistry was involved that would have spawned life, like Matt was saying, there maybe life came from somewhere else, but what I'm saying is if we were to assume that there was some sort of a chemistry reaction that occurred on the planet that produced this reproducing cell or the reproducing, biology, whatever it is, the idea that the chemistry behind that must be simple because the biological organism that resulted was simple is not a given.
But you premised a lot of that with a lot of ifs.
Because I have to premise it with ifs.
if.
I don't know what happened.
Yeah,
Do you?
what's the objection?
Okay, so that's my point. We don't know what happened. We don't know what may have caused life
Sure.
to originate on this planet through natural means.
We don't know. We don't know
Through
how.
any means.
Through any means.
We don't know what did it through any means, but we can only investigate natural means.
I'm still waiting for you to get to creationism in science class.
I'm trying to get to that.
Okay.
So we don't know how life may have originated on this planet through natural means. Now, if we look at humans, we can not create life by the definition of scientific definition of life, but we can create stuff like cells. If we were to develop spaceships in the future...
Wait, what do you mean we create cells? Like, wait, how do we create cells?
I didn't know we could do that.
Yeah, there was an article in National Geographic where we can create simple cells. They can't reproduce. They do have a unique chemical compound of the
But aren't they
chemicals that are involved in...
Are you talking about RNA?
Like the ATC. No, not RNA. They're cells. They're not life. It's not life.
Aren't they
It's cells.
beginning? Aren't they
It's vessels
beginning?
that could contain life.
Wow. Aren't they beginning with existing biological matter to do that?
They're beginning with the basic chemicals of life, which is the
Sure.
the amino
Okay.
acids of
So
the
so we're going
which
off
is
on
considered non-living.
Chris. We're going off on yet another tangent. Please get to it.
You guys keep interrupting me. I'd like to get to my point.
Well, if
I
you
was
quit
going
making
to-
mistakes.
Okay. If humans in the future can take life that we created in the future to other planets, deposit their planet, Earth garden, what have you, we could assume that evolution may take place and it involves creatures like there. My point about creationism being taught in the classroom is this. There is equal evidence for life originating on this planet through natural means than there is equal evidence, which is basically none, that life also was created by a creator.
Wrong.
I'm not saying anything
No.
about the
No,
nature
no.
of that creator.
Chris,
No,
Chris,
wait a
Chris,
minute. Wait a
you're
minute.
just wrong.
There is evidence of nature. There is no evidence of supernature.
What did I say supernature?
Then you're saying nature created it. If you're not saying supernature, then you're saying nature produced it. So then what are we talking about if you agree that nature produced it?
I'm saying an unknown. I'm saying that
You're not saying, but you're not
means
including
is
supernature
unknown.
in that. So you're saying an unknown natural cause, which is basically abiogenesis.
I'm not excluding supernature.
You can't even demonstrate there is a supernature, so how can you include it?
The same reason that you can't demonstrate that life would occur through natural means. But you include
I
that.
can demonstrate nature exists, and so we
But you
can
can't
assert.
demonstrate that life. But you can't demonstrate that life is created through natural means.
I'm saying that
So
there
writing-
is
so
nothing
including
demonstrated
Chris,
to
wait.
exist but nature. So what else would you put in there that wouldn't be natural? Like what is there that exists outside of nature that you're asserting we should include?
I am asserting that a creature, being what have you, that may be natural or unnatural.
What would be unnatural?
Yeah.
What does that even mean?
I don't know. Just
Well, then
like
what
we
are you
don't know
talking about?
what
If
the
you don't even
process
know
is.
what you're talking about,
How the
could
hell
we
does this
possibly
qualify
include
for
it?
teaching in a science class if you don't even know what you're talking about?
The same reason you would say that, well, the Earth could have been incredibly complex billions of years ago, and amino acids may be in a very complex matter creating natural life. If you don't know, but you say that we should teach it.
We
that in the
do
class.
have
No,
information on what the Earth was
no,
like.
stop. At no point has anyone asserted that we should be teaching in the classroom things that we don't actually know. Nobody is asserting, when we teach evolution, we're not teaching that we've solved the problem of abiogenesis. We will discuss the scientific experiments that have been done and the results that they have produced about possibilities. What scientific experiments has creationism done, and what are the results that should be included in a scientific classroom to demonstrate the possibility or plausibility of the model that you're advocating?
The plausibility of my model is based on this. We can create not life, but what may be considered the precursor to life, the cells I was talking about earlier. Again, that's not life, but many scientists believe that's going to be the precursor to life.
What?
We can do
Chris,
it.
what?
Can I please finish?
No, you can't. What?
Okay.
You got, because you're not answering my question. What
You
scientific...
asked me what premise. Yes, I'm talking about scientific studies. I'm talking about human beings.
No, I asked
Is that
you,
not science?
Chris, I asked you what has creationism done scientifically to demonstrate its model? What tests has creationism performed that have given us results that demonstrate that creationism is a viable model?
The test is that a human can creationism can potentially create life. The test would be in our ability to manipulate living tissue and non-living tissue, non-living stuff, materials.
You're not talking about creationism. You are not talking about creationism in any context that anybody else is. Your argument is basically, hey, it may be possible for intelligent humans to eventually create life, and because that may be possible, we should be teaching creationism. Well, that's not creationism.
The other problem, though, is that if they could produce, something that would replicate...
Well, wait, you just stated my position incorrectly. I want to make sure I want to get this correct. I'm not stating that simply because if creationism could exist, we should teach creationism. I'm stating that the process of natural origins of life on this planet are also unknown. I personally feel that both should...
Stop. Listen.
Life began...
Stop, Chris, and listen. Are you listening?
Okay, go ahead. I am. Go ahead.
I've already said that we don't know. And we're not teaching that we do know. But what we do teach are the scientific processes and the tests that have been done and the understanding that we've reached about what is possible, which is why I asked what scientific testing has been done for creationism. You can't, because your argument is, hey, we don't know where life came from, so we should be teaching both sides. The idea that it's natural and the idea that it may not be natural. You have no demonstration. Shut up. You have demonstrated no possibility of the supernatural. And when challenged on this, you go back to, well, I didn't say it was supernatural. It could be natural, in which case we're already teaching that.
I would not say that human beings creating life is natural. I would not say that human beings were around years ago creating life on this planet.
No, but if they can reproduce a chemistry that can do that, then we know that the chemistry can do that. And then the question only becomes, is it possible that this reaction could occur in nature? And if the answer to that is sure, and if those chemicals exist in nature, and if they're found together in nature, then yes. So once you're able to produce this, artificially, it's almost like how we can do we can do artificial selection for evolution, right? I mean, we can artificially select and evolve things ourselves through artificial means, and that also occurs in nature. But if we are able to do that,
the fact that you use the term artificial means that it's not natural. It's artificial.
It still falls into the realm of the natural as opposed to the supernatural.
What you're using is the definition of artificial, which is man-made, right? So yes, there is a definition of artificial, which is man-made as opposed to not man-made. But when we talk about natural causes, that is not the same definition. An artifice, right, some kind of an artifice that exists in the natural universe would be part of the natural world. So what we've got here is a little bit of equivocation going on. I don't think you're doing it on purpose, but
when we breed dogs, we're not doing anything unnatural or supernatural.
Right. It is artificial in that it's human directed, which is generally described. But the point is, when we're talking about a natural explanation, human beings doing it is a natural explanation, not a supernatural explanation. and not an artificial explanation. It's a real explanation of how this occurred in the natural world.
You got 30 seconds to define creationism as you would like it taught.
Oh, just 30 seconds? Okay. I would like this to be taught in the science classroom. Obviously, natural origins of life on planet. Easy. Second thing I'd like to be taught is that life exists on this planet. We do not know how it came here, but a competing idea is that a more complex being placed it here. And that being is more, you can say intelligent, smarter. I'm not sure what the aspects of that being would be because I can't say what it would be to create life, but a more complex being, we can assume more complex than us because we can't do it, a more complex being placed life here.
Okay, your time's up.
From on planet. It created
Your
life.
time's up.
Just wad up Occam's razor and throw it in the trash.
Yep. Hey, you know what else we can't prove didn't happen? We can't prove that universe creating pixies didn't generate the universe because that fits under the complex being. We don't teach in science classroom speculative ideas that have no demonstrated possibility or plausibility. We teach science.
Can you tell me the demonstration?
I'm going to hang up on your ass, I swear. Listen.
Could you please tell me the demonstrable evidence of life occurring naturally? What demonstrable evidence?
Of what?
Of life occurring naturally. Where's the scientific demonstration, the demonstrable evidence?
Okay, Chris,
that
you
life can
idiot!
originate on this planet naturally?
Chris, you're an idiot. We've already told you 4 or 5 times now. We are not teaching that we have solved the issue of origins. And no one is asserting that the origins were necessarily natural.
So in your classroom, what's your definition of how life came? Science student says, where did life come from?
Shut up. In science classrooms, as I've explained now 5 times, the answer is we don't know. We don't know where life came from. We are working on the issue. We are investigating. Why is that so hard for you to understand?
I don't mind the I don't knows.
Good.
But to exclude the natural, to say...
Who's excluding the natural?
To fear that we're going to go into natural and say, well, that we know nature exists, we have to teach that, but any other possible theory we're going to ignore.
How do you know it's possible?
Yeah.
It doesn't. You can't even demonstrate that anything exists outside of what exists naturally. So what in the world would you include? There's nothing else to even examine.
You don't just get to include the supernatural because you like it and it hasn't been excluded. You have to actually demonstrate the possibility that it's there. That there is, you have no way to demonstrate that there's the possibility. So you're wanting to include something with no demonstration of possibility at all, which is something I said 15 minutes ago.
What would a non-natural existence even be?
That's not science. Science doesn't work like that. That's not what we teach.
It's science about excluding possibilities.
Nobody has excluded a possibility. We're just not teaching
excluding.
Shut up, you're done. Nobody is excluding the possibility. The possibility does not get included until it's demonstrated.
Yeah, I wouldn't even know what you would include. It's like we can only examine the natural world, so what would you even include? Like, what else would there be?
You haven't demonstrated that my butt's not magical. Maybe I can just poop things out that come to life. I mean, that's the preposterous. You don't understand science. Plus, there's a difference between science and the methods and what it does and what we teach in the science classroom. And when we're in the science classroom, there are plenty of things that science is working on and theories and models. And what we teach are the results that we have and the method by which we will correct those results in the future. There is nothing about creation model, including your maybe it's supernatural, maybe it's not. You don't get to exclude the supernatural.
And I don't even know if he's talking about supernatural. I don't know what he's talking about.
If he's not, then we're already teaching it.
I don't get it. But it was so weird to me because, when it comes to things like, if you don't have something to examine, I don't even know what you would want included. Like, if there's no way to examine it, how would you include it?
You don't get to exclude the supernatural. Hey, demonstrate that there's a supernatural and we'll include it. That's the way science works. You don't just begin by asserting, oh, well, we don't know that this isn't possible, so let's spend a lot of time and research on something. Oh, it's just nuts.
Let's spend a lot of time on that call.
Yeah.
Okay, who's up?
Anthony in Little Rock, how are you? Thanks for waiting.
Hi, I just want to say thanks. I'm a first-time caller, and it's nice to talk to you guys, Matt and Tracie.
Hey, you too.
Hello.
Hello?
Hello?
Yes, go ahead.
Hi. I've got a question. I consider myself Catholic. My son was raised Catholic as well, but he recently told me about 3 months ago that he does not think that he believes in religion or God anymore. And while I didn't get upset with him or anything, because why get upset? I started having doubts myself, and I guess the question that I'm asking is, when the two of you were, religious, and you were, going on your journey to be a, atheist, did you feel guilty when you first started to not believe or question what you've been told?
I have to say that my journey was a little different, so I didn't go through that. I think I experienced a lot of fear, or I don't know if I'd call it guilt, but it's hard to remember back that far. But I know I was very anxious about the time before I adopted a belief, because I just had this sort of overwhelming fear because I had internalized all these horror stories about what was going to happen to me if I didn't believe. So when I was trying to sort of make myself believe and find the sign or get whatever I needed from God to force me to believe so that I could be one of these people that wasn't scared of going to hell anymore, I kind of went through my anxiety then. And then when I became a believer, of course, I was so happy because all that could go away now, and I didn't have to deal with all that horrible, monsters under the bed that they had threatened me with all those years as a child. And so that relief, was just, it was like ecstatic, right? Because now I'm saved and everything's happy. And so later, when I started to doubt, what really happened was there were people who I met at college that were talking to me about early, apocryphal books. And if you're a Catholic, you may actually be aware of some of these. They were news to me. But there's, these apocryphal books that are not included in the Bible that, the Catholic Church is very big on cataloging those, and they pretty much had the whole corner on how the Bible got put together and where these other books were. And, so the Catholic history was extremely helpful to me when I was confronted by this with my friends at college that were saying that my understanding of how the Bible was put together and my understanding of the history of Jesus was not quite accurate. I actually went to the library at my university to find this information so that I could show them they were wrong, and I ended up finding out that I was wrong. And so it wasn't like a guilty thing, because I wasn't just sitting there sort of in isolation having doubts. I was very, very good Christian going in there to prove my religion, and then found out that I was incorrect on my assumptions and the things that I'd been taught. And so at that point, I started to doubt my church teachings and the Bible, but I didn't feel guilty. I felt like I wanted to tell them and share that with them because they should know, because I don't want them to believe wrong things either. So I went to talk to them about it, and they didn't want to hear it and weren't very receptive to it, and felt like I needed to get back in line, even though I was showing them the information that they were wrong. And then at that point, I still believed in God, so I wasn't even doubting God. And it took about 10 years before I finally started to I was just investigating. I kept changing my view of God, like, what is God? And I would talk to somebody else, and they would shoot holes in something that I believed, or they would have these challenges, and I'd be like, oh yeah, that doesn't really make sense. So maybe God's not like this, maybe God's like this. And it just never even dawned on me that there might not be a God, right? That all these different models and things might just be different things that people were making up. And so ultimately, when it one day dawned on me that there wasn't a God, that I was just simply looking for what basically existed, which was the universe, that was when I was sort of like, oh yeah. But it was such a long journey, and it had gone through so much taffy pulling to get there, that by the time it hit me, it was almost like, oh yeah, because it was just such a long experience. But you're not alone. I mean, there's a lot of people that have fear and doubt and guilt and all kinds of things when they start to question. I mean, totally. Just because it didn't happen to me, we get letters all the time like what you're describing.
Yeah, and I didn't feel guilty My process was entirely, I was trying to be the best Christian I could be, to do what I was supposed to do, kind of along the lines of Tracie, except I didn't have the interaction with the church at that time. One thing I did feel guilty about was, and I don't anymore, was the fact that I had explicitly tried to lead others to Christ. I mean, this thing that I now recognize, I have no good reason to think that it's true, and so I felt a little guilty for misleading people. But I don't anymore, just for the same reason that I don't, blame my parents for raising me in the church. I mean, they were sincerely and honestly trying to do the best they could to teach their kids and raise them right according to what they understood. Now, there's a second question of should they still, be believing given the conversations and what they understand now. But yeah, I didn't have a guilt.
I have a question though, Anthony. Like for yourself, where do you think the guilt arises from? Like where do you think that's coming from?
Well, I would guess for me, it's just about when I've heard people talk about that that a believer believes because in part they're scared to die. They want to believe that something's something more than here, and I think a bit of it stems from that because I was a pretty sick kid growing up, and I still am rather. I have a lot of health problems now, and the simple fact is that the problems that I have could possibly, I could kick the bucket one day because of these issues.
Why do you think that would manifest in guilt rather than fear?
I guess I might have not chosen my words correctly, but I think that it's guilt because I guess it was expected of me when I was growing up. And now with my son telling me that he doesn't believe, like I said, I'm questioning. But he's not even told his mother yet, and it's been almost a year. And he told me he's afraid to tell his mom.
Do you think his fears are founded?
Well, given the things that we've talked about, him and I, when we get together and somehow the subject comes up, we'll talk about the things that can obviously be true in the Bible, but then somehow it always comes back for me that if I don't believe and something is there when I'm gone,
okay,
that I feel guilty for questioning and for doubting. And of course, the fear is there, and I can't even talk to my parents about this because they're very, I'm 44 years old, and my parents are dead set in their ways, and for me to walk in there, and tell them I don't believe would probably be like I'd tell them I was gay.
Okay, so you have really two different issues going on. You've got the idea of disappointing your family. And then you also have the idea of disappointing, I guess, God, in case there's really a God there. Is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, I kind of think now that I hear it, said back to me, I think that's kind of how, kind of how I feel, yeah.
Now, let's just think about this for a minute. If you were God, let's just say, and you want people to believe in you, you want people to love you, and let's say that it is like, it's a good God, decent character, and one of your children that you created is thinking hard about the issue of your existence, and you're sort of sitting back watching it, and this person is struggling with it. And they want to believe. They want to be what you want. They don't want to disappoint you, but they're just having difficulty believing in you. Could you really see yourself like being angry or disappointed? Wouldn't you just be like kind of feeling for that person, almost like you are for your son? Wouldn't you have that sort of empathy and say, I understand the person's trying to do the right thing and they're struggling with this? And I mean, I have a hard time thinking that a God who really cares about you would be disappointed or upset with you if that's really how you were viewing it and you were just trying to be honest with yourself, don't you think?
I definitely see where you're coming from, and unfortunately for me, I've had the displeasure of talking to other believers, and they'll spew a verse or two.
Yeah.
It kind of hits me where I'm what I'm thinking.
Sure.
But then I start to think, well, if he really cared, for his creation, then wouldn't he have already known in the beginning that 2/3 of the planet probably wouldn't believe?
Yep.
Yeah, and not only that, but I guess what I'm wondering is, let's say that God really was upset at you, and He was really angry with you, and ready to shoot you to hell for these doubts that you're having, and for your son's inability to understand this as like a reasonable thing that he can subscribe to. I mean, would you even really want to worship a God like that?
That's what keeps coming back to me. The more I've read certain things, certain sites with different people giving their views on why there isn't, or why there probably isn't, as opposed to people that believe that there is.
Mm-hmm.
I keep coming back to the science part and everything, and I'd like to think I'm a decently logical person. So if something doesn't make sense to me, then usually other things in that area will not make sense.
Sure.
And so I'm conflicted because on one hand I'm like, I've been believing for 35 odd years, and that these things happen. God is with us, and He's watching over us and stuff like that. But then I think of things like the creation story and how that's not even remotely true in any way. I think about the Noah's Ark flood story. That's
Sure.
not remotely possible in any way. So if the Bible's already filled with all these contradictions and stuff, then how can I continue to believe that it's a holy book?
Well, yeah, but you're still having an emotional reaction to it, this visceral like fear and guilt and that you're experiencing. And I guess what I'm trying to do is, I want you to be able to investigate this without fear, right? I want you to be able to give all of this information an honest look, right? I ultimately don't care what conclusions you draw, right, for yourself. You're going to have to figure this out for yourself. But what I want is for you to not feel badly, to not feel guilty, to not feel fearful, just for investigating and asking questions and trying to figure out what you think is true. So what I'd like for you to be able to internalize as like a new way of looking at this, if you're capable of it, would be the idea that if God is a good God, then that God should be accepting of you doing whatever you need to do to try to figure out what you think is true, right?
We have completely run out of time. I apologize.
Can he hold?
But if you can hold, we can talk to you more after the show's over. So-
I'm so sorry, guys.
No, hold
I
on.
do appreciate it.
Just hang on.
Appreciate the time.
No, we're
We'll
putting
be
you
right.
on hold.
We'll put you on hold. We'll be right back with you. Anyway, thanks everybody. There's the crew that makes the show happen. And in science, we don't teach speculation like the idea that gravity is really angels holding you to the ground or moving planets around. We teach the things that we can confirm.
Yeah. Yay, science.
Woot.
Okay, is he there? Because I really want to talk to him.
Anthony, you still
are
there?
you there?
Yeah,
Anthony?
I'm still
Okay,
here.
listen to me. If God is a decent God, then He's not going to hold it against you that you're being honest and doing the best you can, okay? I want you to really wrap your brain around this, because if there's a God that's going to punish you even though you've done the best you could and you're just trying to find out what's true, that's not a good God. When I was younger and when I was searching, I do recall a time when I had to basically tell myself, I'm going to go forward, I'm going to search, I'm going to look, and a God that would condemn me for that is not a God that I could respect or worship anyway. And if that God would send me to hell, then I'm going to end up in hell, because even if that God exists, I can't respect it. I could only really respect a God who would respect a human being who would be honest and look for the truth and do whatever they had to do to try to figure out what was really going on. And I don't think that it's right for you to, don't get me wrong, I mean, you're going to feel what you feel, and you have no need to apologize for anything that you feel, but I feel sorry that you're feeling guilt or fear when all you're really trying to do is just look at something honestly and make the best judgment that you can. And I think that if you would just believe while you're believing in this God, or while you're thinking that this God might exist, if you could just accept that a God that's worth its salt would understand that you're doing the best you can and that you're an honest person trying to find the truth, and then you should be able to search without being afraid.
Yeah, and I'm just going to echo pretty much everything Tracie just said, because, you know, while I went through similar discoveries that you've gone through, you know, obviously this part of the Bible can't be true, this part of the Bible can't be true, this doesn't make sense, I started looking at it and saying, okay, if there were this God, what would I see in reality? What would I feel and experience? And, you know, based on what the church taught, or, you know, the various churches taught about how you can know that God exists and all this desperate seeking and pleading and stuff, I went through all that as sincerely and honestly as possible. And in the end, not only has the God claim not met its burden of proof, but there is more than reasonable doubt about various specific claims to make me think it's not true. But because if there was a God that loved you and wanted you to know that he existed, then you would know. It would just, I mean, I have relationships with people. I don't have relationships with people who don't interact with me at all. I have no relationship with, Joe Bob in Arkansas that I've never met. And so somebody telling me how much Joe Bob loves me, there's no demonstration of that. It's not obvious to me. And if instead what I'm being fed is, you'd better love Joe Bob back or he's going to come down and kick your ass, I'm not going to love Joe Bob at all, because he's disgusting. This idea that God is good and loving and wants you to know that he exists and wants you to be with him forever is what I think is so painfully obviously false, because what we experience in reality is nothing like that. And so people have asked, what happens when you die, Matt, if you find out that this God is real? Well, if I die and I find out that there is a God, it'll either be a decent God who actually cares about me, understands my doubts and confusion, understands why I did not accept, why I didn't think I had enough evidence, why I was opposed to certain things, or it'll be a God that just wants to punish me for reaching the wrong conclusion after not having given anybody enough evidence to reach the right conclusion and not demonstrating any real caring. And if that's the real God, then he can squash me like a bug and send me to hell. But I'll sit down in hell knowing that I'm more moral, that I'm more caring, that I'm a better individual who cares more about others than that God ever could.
And that there's nothing else you could have done.
Yeah.
And when it comes to your family, a lot of people are cultural Catholics. If you think it would just keep the peace to not upset your parents, who I'm sure are elderly, you said you're in your mid-40s. So, I mean, there's no requirement if you do end up with an atheist perspective that you have to then go announce that to your family if it's going to cause a lot of trouble and grief.
Which brings me back to a question I had about your son, because he doesn't want to tell his mother. And Tracie had asked, if his fears were founded. I mean, do you think that his mother would react negatively to this?
To be honest, she's from the Philippines, and her parents are very old school. They take their religion, to heart, and
Mm-hmm.
Whoever doesn't agree with them, they're just wrong.
Yeah.
And they've given that belief system, that train of thought to her, and I definitely think that she would be upset if you were to tell her.
Yeah, in that case, what I tell people is I need as many out atheists and non-believers as we can get in order to change the culture, but nobody should come out if they feel that it's going to, if they're not willing to accept the negative consequences that may come along with it. If it's going to destroy a relationship, one nice thing about not having to accept the simplistic 10 Commandments, thou shalt not lie, I have no problem at all with lying, in the right circumstances. And for example, for many years I didn't tell my parents. They now know. They're going to be sad till their dying day, and I've caused this sadness, and that does manifest a little bit as guilt on occasion. But I had no choice in it. It's not like I just chose to not believe. I just,
Right.
you don't choose your beliefs. You're either convinced or you're not. And if somebody's going to stop loving you or cut you out of their life, or make your life miserable because you believe differently, then your choices are to either accept the consequences or to lie about who you are. And some people have lied about who they are for their entire lives. I just couldn't do that anymore.
Right. I do understand. I do understand what you're saying with that. Yeah.
But we really appreciate the call, and,
Yeah,
and
very
thanks so
much.
much for hanging on. Feel free to email us at tv@atheist-community.com or org.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, yours is like the call that I wait for, Anthony. Your type of call is the call I just wish we would get more of.
Yeah, I really wish we'd have taken your call at the top of the show instead of wasting all that time on somebody who doesn't understand science. But
I do appreciate you taking my call, first of all. But if I may just ask you one brief question.
Sure.
Just one more brief question. Seeing as how for the last 3-4 months I've been the only sources I'm getting for lack of a better word, the atheist viewpoint have been videos like yours, like Christina Rad, for example, Jacqueline Glenn, I believe she is.
Yep.
Are there any books that the both of you would recommend? Maybe I could pick
Yeah,
one
we can actually recommend.
help me
We can actually recommend several now, and probably more in email. A good website resource, infidels.org. They have an extensive library of both historical books and modern articles and stuff. Just tons of reading material. You don't even have to ever buy a book. You could sit there for ages. I tend to recommend on Guy P. Harrison has a book, 50 Reasons People Give for Believing in a God, which is pretty good. John Allen Paulus's Innumeracy has nothing to do with atheism, but it talks a lot about how we get to false beliefs and how bad we are at understanding numbers. Carl Sagan's Demon Haunted World is probably one of the best that you're going to read on that subject. What else?
Yeah, I mean, if you're looking for more biblical references, there's a guy named Bart Ehrman, Ehrman, and he does sort of like biblical criticisms. And what I always recommend to people, because anytime you come out that saying something that Christians don't like, they just simply trash your reputation. So when you read Bart Ehrman, be sure to get a Bible near you that has margin notes or footnotes so that you can confirm what he's describing is in the Bible. The translators normally will have, if you can find a Bible, which is not hard, to get translators' notes in there, they will confirm what he's saying, because a lot of people have trashed Ehrman's reputation because he's come out publicly to basically say what Bible scholars have known for 100 years.
Yeah, one of the two of the best ways to create an atheist is to have them read the Bible critically or go to seminary. Those are pretty much eye-opening experiences. There's a bunch of other books, and I have some that have written by friends of mine that I hate the fact that they're not leaping to mind at the moment.
Yeah.
But
there's a really dense book called A History of God, written by Karen Armstrong. If it depends on how much reading you want to do. It's a pretty thick and intense book, but if you're dedicated to it and that doesn't intimidate you, that would be a good one. And
while I don't always recommend it, I do like it a lot. Richard Dawkins' The God Delusion is,
Yeah.
It's the book that has been the most effective, even if, from my perspective, there are others that I think might do people more good.
And be careful about your wife finding these books.
Yeah. I think we've heard of one divorce because of Dawkins' book that I heard about. But on that note, they're tearing down the studio. We really got to let you go, but feel free to email us, and we'll get you some more information.
I feel guilty about the other calls now.
Yeah, me too. But
Thanks to both of you so much, and don't be surprised if I call you guys again.
Well, good luck to you, Anthony.
thanks.
Thank you both. I appreciate it.
Bye-bye.